Hi there. So now we have talked about ceteris paribus, dependent independent variable. Let's talk about something which is an integral part of economics, which is graphs and equations. Okay, uh, because this is an introductory course, we're not delving too much into mathematics, but still it's important for us to understand how these graphs or equations function. Alright, so here we go. You are going to see a lot of these things basically, right? And because we said that everything is represented in terms of models, and we have been talking about parameters, we have been talking about variables, right, in previous lectures. Now imagine if we were to take the same idea that we discussed, the consumption and the income of an individual, right? So let's say this is how this somehow represents how much an individual is going to consume, and this represents, let's say, this axis represents, these are Cartesian coordinates, right? So as we move on from, this is the point which is 0 for this line and 0 for this line. Okay, this is the point 0, 0. Now as we move in this direction, it shows an increase, okay, or it represents an increase. As we move up in this direction, it represents an increase. So it's just a representation, you have to understand, nothing more than that. So all we're saying is that something like this is very, very common in economics. Okay, so let's say we have a vertical axis and we have a horizontal axis, and let's take the same example that we took in the last lecture. And vertical axis is represented by C, let's say. That means how much that person is going to consume, and this horizontal axis represented by Y, as we said that Y generally denotes the amount of income a person is. So do you really think that the amount of, as the amount of income increases of an individual, do you think that the consumption or the spending of that individual will increase or decrease? It's quite obvious, isn't it? As the amount of income increases, the amount of consumption also increases. So the idea is that this will be a positively sloping line. That means it will go on like this, okay, in this direction. Because as the income increases, the consumption will also increase. That of course is an assumption. It's quite possible that people start saving more when the income increases. It is also quite possible that people start consuming more as the income increases. So there are different factors that govern how much that person or any given person is going to consume given a certain amount of income. But one thing we can assume very, very logically is that as the income increases, the amount of consumption will go up, will increase instead of going down. So what we call this kind of a line is this sort of a line extending from left to right in an upward direction. It's called as a positively sloping line, okay, or a positively sloping curve. So this line is positive. On the other hand, let's say this time we consider vertical axis as price of something, okay, and on the horizontal axis, let's say we consider well, let's say consumption. Why not? Okay, so let's say this is the price of fuel, okay, the price of fuel, and this, considering that it as consumption, the number of trips, okay, the number of trips a person will make in his car. Okay, this is just a hypothetical example, but nevertheless it is logical. If the price of fuel increases, the number of trips an individual is going to make will decrease, right? Higher the price of fuel, lower the number of trips. So let's say the price of fuel being 10, 20, let's make a fresh figure, okay. And by fresh I don't mean the drawing is going to improve, because like I said, I'm writing with number of trips. I'm writing with a mouse pen, okay, so the writing is going to be a little shaky. So the price of fuel, okay, and the number of trips an individual is making. So let's say the price, let's divide the price line like this. Let's say 10 is the price of fuel, 20, again hypothetical numbers, the price of fuel is going insanely high in the real world, 30 and 40. Okay, the number of trips, let's say, okay, let's say in a month, okay, so let's say number of trips 100, 200, and let's take simple numbers, it's easier to understand, 300, this is Sparta, 400, and that was a sequel to 300, I guess. So what is this? If the price of petrol is 10, let's consider that an individual makes 400 trips. If the price of petrol goes up to 20, makes 300 only till Sparta. Let's say price of petrol goes to 30, doesn't even get out of his house. Well, he makes 200 trips. If the price of petrol reaches 40, I don't even know what's going to happen when it's 50. The number of trips in a month comes down to only 100. Now what is happening is that if we were to represent these points, what is really happening is that line that we are going to observe is like this, and this essentially is what is called as a negatively sloping line. Okay, this is a negative curve. So you must have observed the word negatively sloping line. So what is slope? Slope essentially means the rate of change in one parameter given the rate of change in another parameter. Slope, it's simply called as rate of change. Okay, slope is nothing but rate of change. What is rate of change? One parameter changes, how that change affects the change in another parameter. So essentially what are we looking at here is when the price goes from 10 to 20, right? So there's a positive change of 10. The number of trips go from 400 to 300. There is a negative change, right? The change is minus 100. So if somebody asks you, oh well, what is the slope of this line between this and this, you can say, well, the amount of change that was observed here, right, divided by the amount of change that was observed over here. So the amount of change that was observed over here was 10, and the amount of change that was observed here was minus 100. So the slope is going to be, you guessed it, how much? Minus 10 is the slope. So just like this has rate of change, right? Think about it. This is the horizontal axis, this is the vertical axis, this line is sloping like this, so it has a particular slope. If we were to assign numbers, we'll understand how much this staircase, by what slope this staircase is sloping. Okay, and I have deliberately chosen very simple numbers over here, and this is what is called as a linear curve. Okay, it is linear because these are simple numbers, these are not fractions, so these are not exponents. Okay, it's a straight line, and that is why it's a linear, it's a line, it's a linear slope. If we were to take weird numbers like 42 and here it's 300 and it's changing haphazardly, when the change here is 5, the change here is not 100 but 89 or something like that, then we would have a line akin to something like this maybe. Okay, and this definitely is a non-linear line. Well, it's a non-linear curve. Non-linear itself means that it's not a line. So here we are only talking about linear curve, but the idea remains the same. However, okay, the idea is the same. It is still slope, and if it is moving in this direction, it's all hodgepodge now, isn't it? If it is moving in this direction, then it is a negatively sloping curve. If it is moving in this direction, if it is moving in this direction, then it's a positive slope. This one is the negative slope. Alright, that's it. Take care, and do revisit the previous lectures. It will help you keep a linear track of the things that we are discussing. So see you till the next lecture.